I've been asked to just share some of the initiatives, the work that we're involved in as a Caribbean Male Action Network as it relates to gender-based violence, HIV, AIDS prevention, and so forth. I also am here in a capacity as the Deputy Director of Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic. And the work of LACC and CARIMAN intersect in the sense that most of what we're doing locally as CARIMAN, as Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic includes CARIMAN at the regional and local level. And as we speak about the intersect between HIV, AIDS, and gender-based violence, I've actually been asked to focus more on the gender-based violence piece because in Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic, we see a lot of clients who come to us with issues as relates to gender-based violence. For example, over the last 10 years, we've seen about 3,000 clients who have come in specifically with issues related to gender-based violence, to intimate partner violence, which by now you probably would appreciate has some serious sexual violence overtones. So that it is not one issue in isolation. Any of these issues, none of these issues is isolated. They're all intersecting at some point. Because as it relates to the intersection between gender-based violence and HIV/AIDS transmission, we have to look at some of the issues that occur within gender-based violence. And a large part of that, probably a much larger percentage than you would believe, has to do with sexual violence. A lot of sexual violence happens within relationships. Sexual violence is used as a tool of domination in a lot of relationships, so that while gender-based violence or domestic violence is the heading under which we look at a lot of this, that's primarily largely because we don't necessarily use the expression sexual violence as a specific. When you're doing a report, generally the report is not done. When somebody comes in fact, most of the clients who I see, they do not come in with sexual violence as a presenting issue. The presenting issue is intimate partner violence, but when you take the facts, sexual violence is a large part of that. So at the regional level, CARIMAN works, currently we have organizations or affiliations in 12 countries throughout the region, from Suriname in the south to the Bahamas in the north. I think I got the directions correct. Yeah, the Bahamas in the north. We have a regional executive that is made up of 9 persons around these 12 countries. And at the moment, 2 of the executive members are actually Grenadian citizens who are currently present in this room, Mr. Arthur Pierre and myself. And one of the primary pieces of work that CARIMAN is currently involved in is work around working with men and men's organizations to help them understand the prevalence of gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, sexual violence in the region, and work with these men and their organizations to work with women's organizations to combat these issues. We do understand that while intimate partner violence is not only a male on female phenomenon, we do appreciate that the larger percentage is male on female violence, so that we understand that we need to work with men as advocates, as champions for change in addressing the issues of gender-based violence. And on the regional level, we've been involved in a number of projects, which again, as I say, intersects with the work that we do at Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic. And one of these projects is called the Partnership for Peace, or locally you may have heard it referred to as a man-to-man program, which is a program for male perpetrators of violence who have been brought before the court primarily, although we do take voluntary referrals, enrollment. It's a program where when men are brought before the court for gender-based violence or violence-related issues, they are oftentimes referred to the man-to-man program, which is a 16-week program that is run by a male and female, by a team of co-facilitation team of a male and female, And it runs for 16 two-hour sessions, and the men have to attend a minimum of 14 of these sessions, at the end of which a report is presented to the court. Locally, this program is run at Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic. Mr. Pierre is one of our long-serving male facilitators. I facilitated this program in the past, and I'm now the coordinator of this program. And on the regional level, Kariman sits on the Regional Expert Group, which is an advisory group that was convened by UN Women, and that group meets at least once a year to look at the implementation of the project, the program, which currently is happening in 7 territories. So it's not just a little thing that we're doing in Grenada. We piloted it in 2005, and we are currently running cycle 18 in Grenada, but the Partnership for Peace program is now being implemented in 7 regional territories. In Grenada, we call it the Man-to-Man program. In other countries, they have different names for it. And interestingly, within the context of the Man-to-Man program, we do a session on sexuality, HIV/AIDS, and sexuality, HIV/AIDS, and STIs. And Mr. Pierre will testify that for many of the men, and I can tell you that over the last 18 cycles of Man-to-Man that we've run, the youngest participant we've had was 18, and the oldest was 66. And we have, when we come to this session on sexuality, you'll be quite surprised that many of these men who are fathers, and some of whom are grandfathers, how little they know about their bodies, how little they know about their partner's bodies, how little they understand about sexual health and health in general. So that many people go into relationships with a lot of preconceived ideas, a lot of misconceptions, a lot of myths, which they take into their relationship, and they actually have long-term ongoing sexual relationships that are premised on these myths. And obviously you can understand when some of these myths are, if you don't beat me, don't love me, or if you're not pregnant every week, you're not a woman. If you can't make your woman pregnant every year, you're not a real man, and these kinds of things. And the fact that, whether they're biblically based justifications that some of these men use for their actions, or whether they're just, cultural myths and misconceptions, a lot of the issues hinge around a lack of knowledge about sex and sexuality, and a lack of information about safe sexual practices. Another program that we run, this one is primarily a Grenadian program that we created here in 2008, is called Alternatives. And the Alternatives program is a program for young men in conflict with the law, juveniles in conflict with the law. And we've had young men as young as 11 who have appeared before the court and have been given an opportunity to do this program instead of another type of sanction. So we've had 11 to 18. And it is amazing that some of the young men in the program, even as young as 12 and 13, in fact the group we currently have, 12 to 17, and one of the young men, a 14-year-old, was heard to tell one of his brethren in class a couple of weeks ago that right now we're handling a big thing, we're handling a 28-year-old thing. So these are young men who are, to all intents and purposes, boys, children, in school, who have sexual partners much older than them. In fact, in the context of the Man-to-Man program, our 18-year-old participant was in the program for beating his 26-year-old girlfriend. And when he came into the program and I was interviewing him, he was very, very upset that some fast, as he said, macocious woman in the neighborhood, if it wasn't for this maco woman, he wouldn't be in the program, because he has been beating this woman as a way of life in their relationship. And the macocious woman in question happened to witness a beating taking place in a very public place in Guelph and called the police. You might be surprised, I wasn't, because I've been doing this for a very long time. You might be surprised to know that the woman in question cursed the police. She cursed everybody who wanted to arrest him. And she went to court and made a very, very moving plea for the magistrate to give him another chance, please, because just a little lash she was given her. The point of this is that, again, he's 18, she's 26. They are in an established relationship, and violence is a feature of that relationship, including sexual violence. we have situations, as I mentioned, of young men, 14, 15 years old, in school, and not very good at anything in life as yet, but engage in long-term sexual relationships with adult women, many of whom have children, and quite a few of whom have children the age of the young boys that they're having sex with, right? And this is real stuff that we're dealing with. I've been doing this for 24 years, and this is real stuff that we're dealing with every day of the week. So when you think about not just gender-based violence in a small, rigid, in a small, narrow definition, but you think about these unions, visiting unions, transactional unions, on and off unions, whatever you call them, where the sex is probably the main feature, but in a lot of cases there's a fair amount of domination. Either domination by the female partners because the male partners are children, or domination of the male partner by the female or the female partners by the male. We see all the different iterations of this. And Caribbean, understanding that this is a problem that exists regionally, we have created a series of tools, response tools that we've put out there, available on our website and other websites to which we linked, that helps people to understand what these situations are and offers some information, some guidance about how to cope with them. So for example, we have a series of booklets that Caribbean has developed that's called Man Talk, Caribbean Men Talking About, and it deals with a series of issues. And what is the largest issue that Caribbean men do not talk about formally? Sex. They talk about sex a lot, but they don't speak about sex formally, in the sense that when a lot of Caribbean men have issues related to their sexuality or their expression of sexuality or their sexual practices and or preferences, they do not necessarily discuss these in a formal, organized manner as designed to get them information and help. They may talk about it, but they do not go to seek help. Another piece of work that Caribbean does, and we have produced some material around these issues, has to do with men's health, sexual and reproductive health in particular, because again, our lack of knowledge of our sexuality, or our lack of knowledge about our bodies and how they work, and our ignorance in that regard, and therefore unsafe sexual practices that spring from that lack of knowledge or ignorance, can also be gateways to the transmission of sexually transmitted infections, including HIV. We have done a series of videos called Bull in a Pen, which is a series of videos done by Caribbean young people, designed for Caribbean young people, that addresses the issues of sexuality. And one of these videos is premised on this movie that was very popular a couple of years ago, called Rape Land. I don't know if any of you have heard of or seen this movie. But Rape Land is just that. It's a movie that promotes sexuality in its most base, degrading form. And it became the movie of choice in the region, just as quite before it, the movie Brokeback Mountain was the movie of choice in terms of a particular sexual orientation. So understanding that Caribbean people, Caribbean men, Caribbean women, Caribbean youth are constantly fighting with this, with these issues of sexuality and sexual orientation and sexual practices and sexual preferences. Caribbean, as a regional organization, has developed these tools, work with the United Nations system, we work with UNFPA on a sexual violence program, we work with UN Women on the Partnership for Peace program. We've now developed a third program with the UN Women that is called the Community Violence Prevention Initiative. And while in none of the names of these programs do we mention sex, a fair amount of the material in these programs deals with the issue of sexuality. In closing, I just want to bring it back home a little bit to speak about some of our experiences as legal aid and counseling clinic. We are now on March the 11th. And so far for this year, our agency has already brought about 30 protection orders on behalf of clients to court. No, that's not the only thing we do. It does engage a lot of our attention because a lot of these protection orders are being brought by partners or former partners who feel that they're being harassed, that they're in danger of being harmed, hurt by the partners. And I did not say these women, I said partners, because we actually are bringing increasingly more protection orders on behalf of men. And some of these men are men who are in fact being sexually dominated by their partners and having demands made on them by their partners that they're not comfortable with, right? Whether this speaks to women's growing appreciation of their sexuality and their sexual prowess, whatever it speaks to, when partners are not in sync on what they want to do as partners, it can create problems. And so we have seen an increasing number of persons coming in. I mean, for this early in the year to have brought that many means that we're seeing, and we're not the only agency in Grenada that does these applications for protection orders. A woman can go to police stations in some cases, she can go to the Supreme Court registry, and there are staff who are trained to do these protection orders. But a feature of these protection orders, a feature of the stories, the affidavits that are sold, speak to sexual violence. And where there is sexual violence, the entry point for HIV and sexually transmitted infection is magnified, because if people are using force as a way of force in their sexual practices, or if they're using sexual force as a way of dominating their partners, then they are not likely going to be the persons who are going to stop and think about condom use and all of those things, and therefore there's a possibility that more problems are created. I want us to be particularly cognizant of the amount of young people in our society who, both within the domestic context and outside of the domestic context, are facing sexual exploitation fairly regularly. I mean, again, people are now a bit shocked that within a week, from last week Thursday to this morning, 2 cases have been brought before the court with adult men sexually molesting or having sex with children. But that's true that we're going to be outraged about for a couple of hours. And there's a good chance a politician is going to do something exciting before the end of this day, and we're going to move on from this matter and deal with the politics. And then another day something else will happen. We, as practitioners, as concerned persons, as agencies, organizations, departments that have an interest in a healthy society, need to understand the urgency of the responses that we need to put forward in terms of dealing with sexual violence in our society, because the implications are dire. Thank you very much.